Hi. What makes a truly great photo? Think about it. It's a question I have been asking myself over the past few months. What makes a great photo for me? So I have analyzed patterns in the best photos that I have ever taken. And today I want to share 3 core ingredients that all of these photos entail. And I would say without further ado, let's get into ingredient number 1. Alright, let's start with ingredient number 1, which is that your photos need to have a clear subject. Because if within the first half a second your subject is not clearly identifiable, your scene will not make a lasting impact and the viewer will move on. And I have seen 2 common mistakes in photographers' work that has prevented them from having a strong subject. The first one is that there is simply no strong subject and therefore nothing that really captures the viewer's attention. The second issue is that sometimes there is simply too much going on in the scene. So there is like 3 different potential main subjects that compete for the viewer's interest, therefore making the viewer confused, and probably they will just move on instead of having a closer look at your photo. So how are we gonna fix this issue related to a strong subject or lack thereof? Well, first of all, if you're a beginner photographer, make sure that your main subject is clearly identifiable. Within the first half a second, your viewer should know what your scene is about. So focus on just, for instance, having one single subject that is so crystal clear that it's your main subject, and your viewer will immediately grab its attention. And if you're a more advanced photographer, you might consider having one main subject and one supporting element, and you have to make both interact. And what's really important here is to make sure that they do not compete for interest. So it has to be clear that one is your main subject while the other one is just the supporting element that the viewer should only have a look at once they've seen and identified your main subject. And having the supporting subject in your scene will make not only your scene more complex, but it will also allow you to get a little bit more context into your scene beyond only that subject. It can, for instance, tell you where your scene is taken or what kind of environment you have been in when taking this photo. Alright, let's get into ingredient number 2, which is composition. And composition is effectively the way you allocate different elements in your scene for the composition to make sense so that there is no overlaps, and hopefully all of these elements support your main subject that is hopefully strong, as mentioned in the previous point. And here are 3 techniques that you might want to try out. The first one is leading lines. And leading lines are effectively lines that lead deeper into your scene and hopefully toward your subject. And they support your subject because the viewer's eye is going to follow that line and end up at the main subject. So it can also make your subject stronger. The second compositional technique that you can use is framing. And framing is essentially an additional layer in your scene that you place in your foreground that adds some more additional context into your scene while also potentially blocking off some distracting elements in your scene, like for instance a competing subject that you actually do not want to have in your scene because it distracts from your main subject. The final composition technique that I use all the time is negative space. And negative space is effectively just space that you deliberately leave empty, because what is empty cannot distract from your scene, and since it's not very interesting, it actually makes the viewer look at the part of your scene that is more interesting. So the brighter area in your scene where you hopefully place your subject. So you can, for instance, use a wall where you have like no texture and maybe it's also a bit blurry, and then you have the subject somewhere in the distance and nobody will focus on the wall, everybody will just focus on the subject in the distance. So use negative space, leave specific areas in your photo intentionally empty, and it will create this additional pop to the part of your scene that is actually filled with detail, with contrast and your main subject. The last ingredient to a good photo is at the same time also the most important one. If it is there, you can control it. If it is not, there is not really a whole lot you can do about it. And you might have guessed it, I'm talking about the light, and more specifically about good light. And the thing about light is that even if you have a very, very strong main subject, that you have the perfect composition, like that leading line leading into your subject, if the light is dull, so you have like overcast light, cloudy sky, everything is diffused, everything looks gray, everything looks the same, your photo will not have any impact, sadly. And good light, on the other hand, transforms the scene. So what is good light, you might ask? Well, in my opinion, good light is light that is directional, so it has like a clear direction, and at the same time it's not coming from right above your head. Like for instance, sunrise or sunset light, it can really make your subject stand out. Especially if you place your subject close or within the bright light source, because our eye is naturally drawn towards the brightest part in your photo, and at the same time it also creates drama and a degree of contrast between that really, really bright light source and your subject that's probably going to be a bit darker or even completely dark and therefore silhouetted in your scene, making a lasting impact. So now you might wonder, how do I actually read the light? And I would say, as a rule of thumb, that's actually really easy to implement. You should backlit your scene, because if you backlight your scene, it means that there is this nice contrast between your subject that's going to be relatively dark and the bright light source in the background, creating this nice silhouetted, contrasty look. And do you remember when I told you that it's really hard to create great and captivating photos when the light is dull? Well, actually, I lied, because while you cannot affect the weather, you cannot just make the clouds go away and the sun come out, you can actually wait until it's dark, because you will know that eventually it will get dark and then your lights will actually be back, because you're gonna have all these artificial lights popping up, like for instance street lanterns or shop windows, and you can use that angled and direct light to create impactful photos. And if you're interested in low light photography, feel free to check out this video up here, because it will explain to you all the basics that you need to know to capture beautiful images at night. And now it's your turn. Let me know what makes a great photo for you. Let me know in the comment section. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I hopefully see you for next week's video, which is also going to be the last video of 2024. Bye.